Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Well, good morning. We're so happy to have you. This hearing is going to be forward-looking and informative and interesting, and I'm pleased you're here. The Subcommittee on the Interior today will be examining the concession program at the National Park Service. As we approach next year's 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, we are in an ideal position to look at how this agency, which is custodian of our greatest natural resources, is functioning. Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, once said, "Scenery is a hollow enjoyment in the tourist who sets out in the morning after an indigestible breakfast and a fitful night's sleep on an impossible bed." That sounds like that statement was made after personal experience. Director Mather's sentiment, though, is spot on. In order for the vast majority of Americans to enjoy these majestic attractions that belong to them, they need food and lodging and other amenities. The Park Service has a long history of working with private companies to make sure that visitors receive the concession services they need. In fact, concessionaires have provided these services and promoted the park since Yellowstone National Park in my home state of Wyoming was designated the nation's first national park back in 1872. Oddly, though, in our parks, visitation is stagnating. National park attendance has not significantly increased over the last 25 years. This is nationwide rather than park-by-park basis. Despite a national population increase of over 30%, a spike in international visitors, and the addition of dozens of new park units. Currently, the typical park visitor is a baby boomer. Millennials and younger visitors are not coming to the parks in the numbers that we expected. Much of this can be traced to the increase in competition from other tourism opportunities and the Park Service's failure, perhaps, to keep up with the changing tastes of new generations. Concessionaires can serve a pivotal role in reversing this. Our national parks and their concessionaires must keep up with changing times. Younger visitors and contemporary families want access to tech amenities such as internet access and Wi-Fi. They want comfortable and modern places to stay. Concessionaires want to provide these services, and we, both in Congress and at the National Park Service, need to make sure that they're able to offer these things. More visitors using more services results in more money for concessionaires and more money for the National Park Service. Today, we'll be receiving testimony from 3 concessionaires about ways that we can update and modernize the park visiting experience. In addition to these witnesses present, we also have received written testimony from half a dozen other concessionaires representing park operations from all over the country. Now, the issues that were brought up include, first of all, the complexity of the Park Service bid applications. For example, the recently considered Denali National Park prospectus was 1,629 pages long. I mean, that's how long legislation is around here that affects 20% of our economy, that is just sweepingly game-changing. One small single park concession company spent over 2,500 company management hours and more than $90,000 preparing their application. Expanding the operating season is another issue that was identified. In some cases, lodging, such as campgrounds, is very popular at certain parks and actually sells out. Though these parks are open year-round, their concessions operations are seasonal. Grand Canyon National Park, for example, is affected by this circumstance. Another is a lack of a rating system. The Park Service does not employ any way in which to recognize excellence among its concessionaires. California, for instance, uses an awards bonus point system in state park bid submittals for achieving extraordinary ratings 3 years in a row, perhaps a good model for us to look at. There are many other ways we can modernize the National Park concession system, and I hope we can talk about many of these today. I very much look forward to the hearing And I want to hear suggestions on your ideas for improving National Park Service concession services and visitor experiences. We're very fortunate also today to have Ms. Lena McDow, the Chief Financial Officer for the National Park Service, with us here this morning. Welcome. We thank you and all of our witnesses for taking the time to appear. I now recognize Ms. Lawrence, Ranking Member of the Subcommittee on the Interior, for her opening statement.
Good morning. Thank all the witnesses for here, Madam Chairman. I really thank you for holding this important hearing. I appreciate the National Park Service protection and care of our nation's cherished natural and cultural resources and for the important educational and recreational opportunities that they provide for all Americans. As the Park Service prepares for a centennial celebration in 2016, we must ensure that the very best services are provided for the 280 million visitors that our national parks attract each year. Vendors play a key role in providing visitor services. They offer a wide range of recreational and retail services while helping to generate more than $1.2 billion annually in revenue for the federal government. Vendors also employ, and this is an important key, more than 25,000 workers and are major drivers in the growth of communities that surround parks. I understand that the public is demanding more recreational and cultural opportunities during their visits to the national park. I also understand that vendors are ready, willing, and able to provide these additional visitor services, but they have encountered some barriers. Today, we will examine some of the challenges faced by the National Park Service and vendors in providing the best visitor experience to our parks. These challenges include a rigid contracting process, contracts which create negative cash flow for vendors, and the Park Service failure to meet public demand for more services. Although the Park Service has made great improvements in its contracting processes in recent years, more work is needed and more work should be done. We can always work to improve the contracting process with greater cooperation between the government and the industry, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses here today as we explore possible solutions that can drive progress in this issue and help create a memorable centennial celebration that all Americans can take pride in and enjoy. I yield back my time, Madam Chair.
I thank the ranking member, and I would like, the chair notes the presence of the gentle lady of the District of Columbia. Thank you for your interest. We welcome you to participate in today's hearing. Some of our most notable and recognizable National Park Service properties are right here under your nose, and we appreciate your stewardship and fine work on their behalf. Thank you. I'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize our panel of witnesses. First of all, once again, very pleased to welcome Ms. Lena McDow, Chief Financial Officer of the National Park Service at the U.S. Department of the Interior. Mr. Terry McCrae, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Hornblower Tours, and Mr. Alex Klene, Vice President and General Manager of the Grand Teton Lodge Company and Flag Ranch Company, one of my personal favorites. And Mr. Chris Balan, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Historic Tours of America. Welcome, one and all. Please rise and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record show they answered in the affirmative, and thank you, and please be seated. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire statement, written statement, will be entered into the record, but we'll keep you pretty close to a 5-minute clock during your prepared remarks as you share them with us. The chair recognizes Ms. McDowell for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you at this hearing on modernizing the National Park Service concession program. In 2016, the National Park Service will celebrate 100 years as the steward of the nation's most cherished national and cultural treasures. We are actively preparing for our second century and working hard to inspire the next generation of visitors to experience and value their public lands. Concessions will play a critical role in providing food, lodging, and recreational services to those visitors. Today, concession contractors provide an array of services across the national park system, from operating iconic lodges to guiding climbers and hunters to providing ferry transportation and children's educational programs. The National Park Service administers around 500 contracts in over 100 parks. These contracts range from under $100,000 to over $140 million in annual gross receipts, and currently generate more than $1 billion in annual gross revenue for concessioners. The concessions program has been defined by two major laws, the Concessions Policy Act of 1965 and the National Park Service Concessions Management Improvement Act of 1998. The 1965 Act provided protections for incumbent concessioners, including a preference in the renewal of their contracts, contract terms of up to 30 years, and possessory interest, which recognized a right of compensation for improvements made by concessioners. By the early 1990s, Congress recognized that the concession system required reform. In many cases, visitor services lacked quality, facilities were not being maintained, and prices were higher than comparable goods and services outside the park. Most observers attributed these problems to a system that essentially provided a permanent contract to any concessioner that wished to continue operating. The desire to transform the concessions program into a more competitive, business-like operation was the driving force behind the 1998 Act. The 1998 Act repealed the preference in renewal, providing preference only for small concession operations, shortened the maximum contract to 20 years, and replaced possessory interest with leasehold surrender interest. The law also called upon the National Park Service to ensure reasonable prices for visitors, to implement more contemporary business practices, and ensure a fair return to the government in the form of franchise fees. Over the last 14 years, we have taken significant steps to meet those objectives, and there have been many successes. We have significantly increased franchise fee revenue, reduced the amount of deferred maintenance related to concession facilities, used new contract requirements to better maintain concessions facilities at many parks, and reduced the number of contracts operating under continuations or extensions from nearly half the contract inventory in 2002 to about 17% today. From 2004 to 2014, there has been substantial growth in both concession gross receipts and franchise fee revenue. Concessioner gross receipts have grown from about $805 million to $1.3 billion a year, and franchise fees have grown from about $27 million to over $85 million. The increases are a result of more professional financial analysis, better business opportunities for concessioners, and higher bids from concessioners as competition has spurred many prospective vendors to bid higher than the minimum required franchise fees. The more professional prospectus development process and more competition for concession contracts have also resulted in benefits for visitors. A few highlights include new facilities at Yellowstone, Badlands, Kings Canyon, and Hawaii Volcanoes National Parks. Increased options for overnight accommodations by adding camper cabins, which combine camping and lodging at John D. Rockefeller Jr. Memorial Parkway and Lassen Volcanic National Park. It's also resulted in a better variety of food and beverage offerings and retail options, featuring locally produced foods and regional handcrafted items, upgraded furnishings at many facilities, and frequent incorporation of park interpretive themes and messages throughout concession operations. While we have made progress since the implementation of the 1998 law, much work remains. As the National Park Service enters its second century, we are exploring ideas to improve facilities and attract new audiences by providing a broader array of visitor services and by expanding the number of companies interested in bidding on commercial services contracts. The National Park Service will continue to pursue ways to modernize and improve the program and is open to new ideas that would provide us with an opportunity to better meet our mission. Madam Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. McCrae, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, the National Park Hospitality Association is pleased to offer testimony today regarding the great opportunity we have to continue providing visitor experiences in our amazing national parks. My name is Terry McCrae, and I serve as the volunteer chairman of the National Park Hospitality Association, which is the organization that has members providing more than $1 billion of visitor services within national park units. Just a little bit about my company. We started as a concessionaire in 2006 with the service to Alcatraz Island, added Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island Immigration Museum in 2008. Since then, we've served over 45 million visitors to those two parks. We use a fleet of 15 different vessels and provide 250 direct jobs, many to professional mariners. In 2014, we paid over $19 million in franchise fees to the National Park Service. Hornblower and the other members of NPHA are grateful every day to be concession partners of the National Park Service. We have some amazing member companies that have super promotional capabilities, contemporary management practices, all of which are intended to produce benefit to those companies, but also more financial resources for the parks and, of course, great visitor services. My comments also reflect today the respect we have for the employees and leaders of the National Park Service. They truly have a complicated, challenging job to manage some of the greatest natural and cultural assets anywhere, and keeping these assets relevant to the American public. And by and large, they do an amazing job considering their challenges. America's national parks are a unifying legacy. With the centennial coming along, it's really an important time in the park's history. And the parks, frankly, should be nonpartisan. They shouldn't be R's and D's and I's visiting parks. They're all Americans. The fact that the centennial is here shouldn't hide the reality that we have a few challenges within the parks. There is a need for new resources and new strategies. But frankly, even during the worst times in the Great Depression, the parks were able to advance and move forward. And so today, I think some of that same vision is important to bring to bear. As the Chair pointed out, visitation in the parks has really been unchanged for the last 25 years, particularly considering that the population has grown and the number of new park units has been added. There's fewer visitor choices in the parks in some cases. There should be more opportunities to provide those visitor services. And frankly, considering the overall budget of about $3 billion and less than $100 million in that comes from franchise fees paid by the visitors through the concessionaires, it seems like there's a huge opportunity there. Concessioners pay almost $100 million in franchise fees, but there's certainly more ways that those can be improved. We have almost 25,000 employees working, serving about 100 million visitors annually. So many of the parks and lodges that people enjoy in the parks today were built by some of the first concessioners. The maintenance of those facilities is now a challenge. There's plenty of opportunity to consider how that should be done in the future. The Concession Act of '98, I'm a poster child for that. We came along after that act, and we provided many of the benefits that Lena spoke about, arriving and working under a new system. But the fact of the matter is that the Concession Act needs a tune-up. After 15 years, there's some opportunities to make some fixes there, to deal with things like LSI and other areas that need to be improved. In fairness to the National Park Service, they've adjusted dramatically over the last 15 years to the new Concession Act, and they have built a strong new team of concession and business service leaders, and they're gathering more momentum and traction all the time. Efforts to promote the national parks are lagging, considering what a great opportunity that is, and with the centennial, there's more and more opportunity to do that. By and large, a tune-up of the '98 Act that includes modernizing some of the business practices and adding the capability to promote the parks to the overall partnership between the concessionaires and the Park Service is important. I'm going to introduce a great article here by National Geographic that talked about how good old marketing saved the national parks 100 years ago when they were first trying to get traction. And in our testimony, we've provided 10 important recommendations to try to advance the cause of both the concessionaires and the National Park Service in serving the visitors. So I think that concludes my remarks, and happy to answer questions and have discussion as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCrae. I now recognize the gentleman from the beautiful, beloved state of Wyoming, Mr. Klene, for 5 minutes.
Chairman Loomis, thank you. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Alex Klene. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Grand Teton Lodge Company and Flag Ranch Company in the great state of Wyoming. I'm joined by representatives from Delaware North Company and Forever Resorts who also operate in Wyoming. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. We operate lodging campgrounds, restaurants, retail outlets, gas stations, and other visitor activities in 2 national park sites. Many of these facilities were constructed or modernized by Rock Resorts shortly after John D. Rockefeller donated the land that is now part of Grand Teton National Park. We're fortunate to have an incredible group of National Park Service staff to work with every day. Park Superintendent David Vela is to be commended for his leadership. My comments today are in the spirit of the continued successful partnership with the National Park Service. There are 3 areas I'd like to focus on: improving facilities and service, implementing modern business practices, and recognizing and rewarding outstanding concessioners. We strive to not only maintain our facilities and services, but improve them where it makes sense. In campgrounds, we've made significant improvements, including better ADA accessibility, more electric hookups, and the addition of bear boxes. In our lodging facilities, we've added high-speed internet access in most locations. Just in the last year at Jackson Lake Lodge, we have expanded food and beverage service through the addition of an outdoor kitchen, renovated 361 guest bathrooms in the winter in Jackson Hole, and made other infrastructure improvements. Last month, we started providing guided kayak tours at our Coulter Bay Village Marina. I have 2 recommendations that will encourage even more improvements of facilities and additional services. Firstly, contracts need to allow for more flexibility to address services and improvements not anticipated at the beginning of the contract term. Secondly, all parties would benefit from a simplified process for capital projects. This would lead to a better and more timely use of these funds. The price approval and standards evaluation process would also benefit from the implementation of modern business practices used in the hospitality industry. In Grand Teton National Park, we've worked with the National Park Service to pilot the use of modern revenue management strategies, such as a length of stay restriction, and are working on proposals to introduce even more modern yield management practices. Through our online comment card system, we receive real-time feedback from visitors. We share access to this system with the National Park Service, allowing them full review of all guest feedback. Websites such as TripAdvisor also provide guest reviews that can be viewed by consumers and park personnel alike. My recommendations to implement modern business practices include: consider whether or not the current NPS practice of standards and evaluation remains relevant with the wealth of other data available, and encourage the further testing of modern revenue management strategies used industry-wide, and consider market declaration pricing in parks where significant lodging is available in gateway communities. In the 60 years that we've operated in Grand Teton National Park, we feel our overall performance has been strong. We've provided high-quality visitor services, built a sustainable business, maintained strong community relationships, and partnered with the National Park Service. Unfortunately, this strong track record provides no assurance we'll be successful in continuing our operations beyond our current contract. The current competitive process for concession contracts is imperfect. On one hand, the current process has done a good job of raising the bar for performance and challenges concessionaires to operate more safely, more sustainably, and provide greater care to the assets. On the other hand, the unintended consequence has been further consolidation of concession contracts, less competition, and the reward of concession contracts to those that can not only necessarily deliver the best operations, but those that deliver the best proposal. I have 3 recommendations for the contract process: a system designed to reward those that do provide excellence in concession operations would benefit both the incumbent concessionaires as well as the National Park Service. Such a system would encourage constant innovation and excellence in the performance of a contract. Longer contracts could provide the security of a return on investment where significant facility and infrastructure upgrades are required, and adding transparency wherever practical. The current process lacks transparency and doesn't allow unsuccessful bidders to understand the perceived shortcomings. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you to the men and women of the National Park Service who steward the parks on behalf of the American public, future generations. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bland for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, distinguished members, ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, my name is Chris Balan. I'm the CEO of Historic Tours of America. We're the largest operator of themed vehicles in North America, hosting approximately 3 million guests each year. We have operations in Key West, St. Augustine, Savannah, Washington, Boston, and San Diego, and most recently were awarded the contract for interpretive services in Arlington National Cemetery. We also operate 10 historic attractions, including, for the state of Florida, the Truman Little White House, Potter's Wax Museum, the first wax museum in the United States, the Boston Tea Party Ship and Museum, a $25 million recreation of Griffin's Wharf, celebrating the single most important event leading to the American Revolution. More to the point, in concert with the founding owners, we've operated the ferry to the Dry Tortugas National Park in Fort Jefferson, which is 70 miles west of Key West, for a number of years, and in 2010 were awarded the sole service contract. Ken Burns characterized the National Park System as America's best idea. I submit that the dedicated members of the National Park Service with whom I've been able to deal and your partner concessioners believe that. I had the opportunity to hear a speech by Director John Jarvis entitled Field Guide to American Values, and came away convinced that the great parks of this country are the truest and most pure definitions of what makes us a great nation. But the National Park Service is facing enormous challenges. There is a backlog of billions of dollars of deferred maintenance. The National Park Service is mired in well-intended but archaic rules of engagement with its concessioners. The NPS faces almost routine annual budget cuts, and the parks are fighting for relevance in the new age of technology. So, we can gnash our teeth in despair or collectively embrace the wisdom of the Chinese proverb that crisis is opportunity riding the dangerous wind. On the eve of the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, it's past time to seize the day. Your concessioners represent hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and tens of millions of dollars of potential infrastructure investments and are ready to join hands to do just that. Thank you for this opportunity to share for your consideration our individual and collective viewpoints, ideas, and hopes and dreams for the future. Our concession is bigger than most, but certainly smaller than many. We will generate revenues this year between $9 and $10 million. But I'm here as a case study to share some lessons we learned over the past 3 years concerning a request to remend our contract. If learned from, these lessons and observations might make all the difference, or not. For as we know, those who will not learn from their mistakes are bound to repeat them. The Reader's Digest version of our background of our concession is we were awarded the contract on November 2010. Previously, there were 2 operators, each allowed to carry 100 passengers for a total of 200 a day, paying the park a measly few $100s for the privilege. Our contract required the production of a brand-new state-of-the-art high-speed ferry at a cost of approximately $6.5 million, with Coast Guard certification to carry 250 passengers. Here's where it gets interesting. The general management plan called for a maximum daily visitation of 350 from all sources such as our ferry, seaplanes, and private vessels. We were now limited to only 150 passengers a day. Why such a large vessel? To provide a commodious experience for passengers and to carry camping gear. Fair enough. But it became immediately evident that the daily visitation of 350 was never achieved. In short, there was excess capacity. Given our new ability to work with the National Park Service to market the product, we were confronted almost daily with standbys of over 20 people and some who didn't even show up. The market had spoken, and it was an aha moment. The GM capacity was not being met. We had the seats, and people wanted to go. Sounded good. Sounded good to us and also by the staff of the National Park Service. We made our initial ask for an increase of passengers of 25 each day in February 2013. But we're to find out the path of common sense flexibility in these contracts was not an easy one. I'm a businessman and would not enter a contract, especially one for 10 years, to someone to manage my property without a tacit or explicit way to adjust the agreement. Things change. Fuel goes up. Hurricanes come. BP spills oil. World economies and travels change. No, the National Park Service is not a business, but it is in business and needs to respond accordingly. The result of our request, after 20 months, it was approved, and even though Everyone assured me it was a good idea. There was just no mechanism to get it done. There was a loss of revenue, and perhaps as many as 10,000 people were denied the opportunity to see one of America's most unique and wonderful places. In just 7 months since getting permission, we paid the park an additional $117,000. More importantly, the National Park Service missions of public access and asset protection have been better served, and it was all done with the stroke of a pen. Takeaways: the National Park Service doesn't have to do anything. The parks will continue to be funded at some level of probable diminishing amounts, but the results will be a self-fulfilling prophecy of a downward spiral of failing infrastructure and loss of relevance. I don't speak for other concessions, but I think what the National Park Service should do is build common sense flexibility into these long-term agreements and drive the decision-making process down to the lowest level possible. The folks who run the parks know what needs to be done. Give them the responsibility and the authority. It's appropriate to quote Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "Find the right person to do the job, then get out of their way." Finally, I think that you should incentivize the good efforts of your concessioners and, frankly, your own people with a measurable format of performance and reward those efforts with contract extensions. Thank you for the opportunity to be stewards of these great assets. Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, gentlemen and gentlelady. We will now follow with questions from the members. The chair will recognize herself first for 5 minutes. Ms. McDowell, have you heard some of these suggestions before from concessioners? The concerns about contracting and lack of contract flexibility and complexity of contracts. And can you respond to those, please?
I think many of the things that these gentlemen have mentioned, we have heard from many concessioners on occasion. I think over the last number of years, we have worked within the existing law to try to deal with some of these challenges. I do think that there are some elements of the law, particularly when you look at contract rigidity, that are a result of not just Park Service process, but are a result of the law. And I think the Park Service would agree that having more flexibility in contract models would be of value.
So you would work with the committee and its members to bring about some changes that would augment the flexibility of contracting?
I think the Park Service would be interested in exploring those opportunities.
Thank you very much. The backlog is pretty significant at some of our park properties. I think in aggregate, it's over $11 billion. Again, Ms. McDowell, are there ways in which concessioners could be part of the solution to address the backlog?
Our primary avenue for financing capital improvements for concession-managed assets is leasehold surrender interest. I do think there is interest on the part of concessioners in doing more capital improvements. I think the difficulty from the Park Service perspective is we are always looking at the financial feasibility of concessions contracts. The way that leasehold surrender interest works, the investment grows over the life of the contract. So at the end of the contract, the amount that's owed on that contract has to be paid by the next incoming concessioner if another concessioner is chosen. So the Park Service is very careful about how much LSI it approves on a particular contract in order to make sure we don't end up in a situation where a contract is, we call it upside down, where essentially the revenues that are expected over the life of that contract can't support the burden of the LSI investment that would need to be made by an incoming concessioner.
I'd ask the other panelists to respond to that concern about a contract getting upside down. Would anyone care to comment on that?
I would. Alex Klene, Grand Teton Lodge Company in Flag Ranch. I agree with the conundrum, but I don't see an obvious fix to it. These are large facilities. They have significant infrastructure, and they require investment. And it becomes a circular problem. We can't invest in the facilities because we don't want to increase the LSI, in order to make the contracts more competitive, and then that circle continues. And I think we need to find a way collectively to break that cycle. And from time to time, I think embracing additional LSI may actually be in the best interest of both parties.
Anyone else care to comment? Mr. Balan?
Yes, Chris Balan, HTA. In business, and I keep talking about business and the National Park Service, and I don't think they're exactly enemies or antithetical. You have what's called the return of capital and return on capital, and to get somebody to invest in these properties, they have to be assured of two things. A, they're going to have enough time to amortize those costs, and B, they're going to be some profits involved to justify the risk. And I think that comes back to what I said before about rewarding the good efforts of your concessionaires with contract extensions and to give them flexibility to change their business model as the contract proceeds.
Mr. Klene, turning specifically to Grand Teton National Park, you speak highly of the National Park Service staff that you deal with. How important is that relationship in ensuring the successful park operations, and how can it be improved in parks that are not as blessed as Grand Teton?
Madam Chair, our relationship, I don't think it's unique, but I do take great pride in the relationship that we've had in Grand Teton National Park. I think on both sides, we view it as a partnership. We have shared mutual goals. We communicate effectively. From time to time, we may disagree on a certain point, but I think that's a matter of just doing good business. And, that local relationship, I think, is very important. And I think we have some people in our national park on the concessions management staff and in administration, including the superintendent, the deputy superintendent, that I would loosely term as progressive in the National Park Service, that they are open to new ideas. And I documented a few items in my testimony that I think are progressive in the National Park System. We have had some significant success. I'd just like to see that grow. And I think in some cases, the relationship is not as viewed as a partnership. It's viewed somewhat as adversarial and in an oversight manner. And I think if we truly do embrace this partnership, I think together we can move forward.
Well, thank you, panel. The chair provided herself a very generous 5-minute clock. She will do the same with the ranking member. Ms. Lawrence is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions, but I just want to make the comment. I continuously state that I was previously a mayor of a city, and I use the term often that a pothole does not have an RD on it. It just needs to be fixed, and I like that analogy of our parks do not have R's or D's on them. I wanted to ask a question, and Madam Chair, if you would allow me to enter into the record a statement from John Gardner, who's the Director of Budget and Appropriations for the National Parks Conservatory Association.
Without objection, so ordered.
I wanted to ask the question of Ms. McDow. In the statement from Mr. Garner, he talks about those extenuating circumstances like wildfires, flooding in our national parks, and the impact it has on our budget. Can you talk to me about how that is budgeted for the national parks, and is that a challenge?
How the Park Service
Yes.
covers the cost of those types of events?
Yes.
One moment. So we do have emergency authorities to deficit spend. We don't save up for those kinds of events. We don't keep accounts
it's not budgeted.
Right, that are, right.
Okay. That's interesting. Hornblower Cruises operates boat tours to iconic destinations, and if if you're the same cruise, I've used it in Niagara Falls. But we've heard complaints that the Park Service has refused to extend the operating hours to these monuments in spite of an overwhelming public demand for change. Mr. McRae, please tell me more about these issues and discuss whether your company has requested an extension for your services to these locations, and what has been the National Park Service response?
Generally speaking, the last tickets are sold in the mid-afternoon in the city that doesn't sleep at all. It's sometimes a staffing question. It's sometimes thought of as a budget question, although the payments for franchise fees will pretty much support any operating hours at that location. So there has been some movement in that. We had an evening program several years ago that was discontinued, but not for lack of demand. So the park has been receptive there to some movement, although considering how large the opportunity is, it's a glacial pace to expand visitation that way. Alcatraz, we have had some opportunity to expand shoulder season definitions. We went from having 3 seasons to having 2 seasons. We can run 14 cruises a day during the busy season and 10 during the winter. The fact of the matter is Alcatraz is virtually sold out all the time. We could probably have 50% more, maybe 100% more visitors there than we actually have. And there's a lot of different reasons. Some, can be overcome through change in programming and change in facilities. I just think, generally speaking, the parks are not as driven to find ways to increase visitation because they don't operate off of that budget.
Mr. Balan? Your company, Historic Tours of America, experienced similar issues. And if I'm not mistaken, it was stated that it took nearly 2 years to resolve. Can you tell me why it took so long? What was your experience?
We have the rest of the day. Well, again, this is our first concession, and our experience in working with the parks was rather new to the game. I worked with the local guy at Everglades, Dan Kimball, who's now retired, and boy, he thought it was a great idea. He said, I'm going to make this my legacy contribution to the Dry Tortugas because it makes sense. I mean, as I said before, the general management plan of 350 was never met. There just weren't enough people going out there. We had the capacity, and people wanted to go. So it seemed a very logical thing, but this thing went up to Atlanta, then it went from Atlanta to Washington, then back down to Everglades, and it was back and forth so many times. I've got a whole sheaf of documents of letters and emails going back and forth trying to get this done. And it was something, as I said before, I think it really should have been delegated to a lower level than Washington, D.C. The people in Atlanta certainly know what to do in this regard, and I can tell you that the folks in Everglades did too. It was just a no-brainer thing. It had no impact on the asset and a minimal impact on staffing. So why not?
If you will allow me to ask just one more question, Madam Chair. Ms. McDowell, you've heard the comments made from these two. What has the National Park Services, have you analyzed it, have you identified it, and is there any movement to change the processing so that we can cut down that turnaround time?
So there are a number of things that the Park Service is doing, particularly for smaller contracts, to try to streamline the RF, or the request for proposal process, and the contracting process. I think when it comes to the process for trying to make changes in services during the life of a contract, the Park Service is trying to be as flexible as possible administratively within the context, within the constraints of the law, to make changes to services. I think that the constraint we're operating under is that, and forgive me, I don't have the clause memorized, there are some clauses within the law that talk about the Park Service needing to issue a new prospectus if they're going to expand services or add new services during the life of the contract. So the Park Service is very careful about where that line is, and I think some of that frustration you hear from concessioners, I think commercial services people in parks share those same frustrations. 10 years, 15, 20 years is a long time on a contract, and things do change. But we don't have a great deal of flexibility to make significant changes during the term of a contract. And part of the back and forth is working with the lawyers to determine what is significant.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the gentlelady and recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Ms. McDowell, I want to ask you a little bit about the backlog that you have in deferred maintenance and some of the infrastructure issues that the Park Service now faces. What steps is the Park Service taking to address this backlog?
So I think we've done a number of things. I think the work that's been done to get a handle on what the backlog is in the first place was the first significant move. I think you're seeing the Park Service now really focus its attention and resources on our high-priority, non-transportation deferred maintenance, those facilities that really are important for serving visitors, and working on ways to direct funding to those
Let me ask
facilities.
you.
Yes.
I want to get to some specific things here, maybe even generate some ideas. But when you say those significant, would you, what would those be? Would it be anything from a visitor facility to a road or a bridge?
So non-transportation are the things that I'm focusing on. So things like
Would that
visitor
include
centers.
a ferry?
Yes, visitor centers, bathrooms.
But when you say non-transportation, would that exclude ferries?
So the Park Service doesn't own many ferries. I think we're talking about buildings for the most part.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And trails to a lesser extent.
All right. One of the things that, looking through the background on this, is the leaseholder surrender interest. Is there a possibility that more private investment could help address some of the, or maybe even a significant portion of the infrastructure improvement needs?
I think in some of the concession-managed assets, there is certainly a role for the private sector. I think you see that in some of the longer concessions contracts that we have recently issued and that we're about to issue. There's the large lodging contract at Yellowstone that's 15 years that has a great deal of private investment associated with it.
Okay, does the Park Service own the lodge, or is that a private?
The Park Service does own the facility.
Is there any possibility that you could have a public-private partnership where a private entity owned the lodge?
I don't immediately know the answer to that.
That's one of the things that I think you might want to consider in addressing some of the backlog is, and again, if you take a look at the leaseholder surrender interest, and we could work out some arrangement where private entities own the facilities, and the contract or the agreement was structured in such a way that over the long term they would be able to not only recover their investment but earn a profit. It might take some of the burden off of the Park Service. Some of Mr. McCrae or Klein or Mr. Balan, do you have any, and this is just in the context of some ideas that might help solve some of these problems and make your job a little bit easier? Mr. McCrae?
Mr. Palmer, I could speak to that for a moment. One of the things that the 98 Act did do is provide for the ability to do some leasing. So from a practical standpoint, some of the projects and opportunities that require a much longer amortization period than is available under the concession contract could probably best be handled by leasing. And frankly, it might be a nice bridge between figuring out what the LSI solution is, because you do need a long period of time to amortize some of these investments, and it's really not provided the capability to do that within a shorter concession agreement. So clearly the leasing channel is one, and in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, we have two examples of that. One is the Argonaut Hotel, and one is Cavallo Point. So the Park Service does have assets that can be leased, and probably with some urging and some direction, they would probably do more of that.
Well, my perspective is that when you have a private interest in something and you basically own it, you've got more motivation to invest in it, keep it up, and I think it helps on the concession side. It helps in attracting visitors. I want to go back to Ms. McDowell on the fees. The Inspector General's office laid out some specific recommendations, some of which you have handled well. Where are you in the process of increasing the fees?
So we have finished, for the most part, the public engagement process that we go through before we make a decision to raise fees. Most parks that did engage in that conversation with the public have decided to raise fees, maybe not quite as much as they had proposed, but many of them are raising fees. I think we started seeing increases back in February, and most parks that were going to raise fees have raised them so far, usually after Memorial Day at the beginning of the season.
All right.
So we are moving forward.
Well, my time has expired. I would just like to conclude with this, to encourage the Park Service to look at these public-private partnerships as going forward as maybe a part of the solution. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. McDowell, what law are we talking about? You've mentioned the law a number of times. Could you tell me a code section if you have it?
It's the Concessions Management Improvement Act of 1998.
Okay. And specifically, you mentioned some of the parts of the law that are constraining you. Can you give me some more detail? Because I think one of the things that we all want to do on this committee is try to help you gain that flexibility. And if there is a statutory remedy, I think we all want to try to look at that.
So the way that the law lays out the request for proposal process, it requires the Park Service to be very detailed at the front end about the services that should be provided and the structure of the contract. So there's not really much of an opportunity for negotiation. In the private sector, you might, or in even an airport concessions process, they might have a two-part process where they find qualified bidders, and then they actually negotiate with them to talk about what kinds of services the various offers might provide. The Park Service can't really do that under this law. We have to evaluate and decide at the front end what services should be offered. That goes into an RFP. And the bidders have to bid on a contract that's almost completely set in the RFP. There's not much room to maneuver after we select an offerer.
So you've mentioned a contract model. Is this that the FAA has, or what?
So some of the things, or some of the examples of more flexible models would be the types of leases that Mr. McCrae mentioned. Managing agreements are common in the hotel industry. Neither of those are real options under the concessions law. We do have leasing authority, but it specifically does not allow the Park Service to enter into a lease when a concessions contract is what we should use.
Any other areas of flexibility? Obviously, you're dealing with lodging, you're dealing with food services, you're dealing with a number of different areas. I would imagine each of them needs a separate type of flexibility.
Right. They are all very unique, and I think having the ability to mix and match different contract types, change the way the terms are constructed for various business opportunities would be valuable.
Okay.
We have a one-size-fits-all approach right now.
Who are the best people to talk to at the Park Service to try to deal with developing a different model or looking at different models and trying to apply that?
It would be the commercial services program within the chief financial officers.
And you know those folks well?
Service. Very well.
Okay. I have no further questions. I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman and would ask the panel if they would be willing to entertain a lightning round where we each get one question and one question only and alternate. Without objection, we'll take that approach, and the chair recognizes herself for one question. Ms. McDowell, are these contracting, the attorneys that, or people who draft these prospectuses? For example, I've been told at Denali, they even specify within the prospectus application different prices for soft drinks in different parts of the park. I mean, that sounds like micromanagement to such an extreme that you can visualize a 1,600-page contract. You can also visualize a less efficient bidding process when that kind of specificity is included in the prospectus application. Is that normal? And do all of them have that type of specificity? And doesn't that seem, how can we ferret out that kind of micromanagement from the contracting process and really get down to the type of contracting that would benefit the Park Service as well as the applicants?
So there are things that we are doing to reduce the amount of specificity that's required on those types of things. There's an approach called core menu where Washington has been very encouraging for parks and regions who are developing contracts to really only look at a small subset of items on a particular menu, for example, and the Park Service would approve rates on those items, maybe 5, 6, 7 items on a menu, and the rest of the menu items are available for the concessionaire to price however they would wish. Washington does not dictate to every park and every region exactly how they should structure their contract. It's a very decentralized organization. We leave a lot of local discretion to the field. And so even though that flexibility is there, we do still have circumstances where I think there is probably more specificity than is required.
Thank you. Ms. Lawrence?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have spoken about the centennial coming up. The House is considering the appropriation bills that would increase the parks budget by roughly $50 million this year. That's a good start, but given the importance of the upcoming centennial year and the substantial funding challenges that the park is facing, is that enough? So my question to you, Ms. McDowell, what is the Park Service planning to do to make sure our parks are ready for the centennial? And it's only supposed to be one question. So, what are you doing, and will you have the funds to do it?
So I think you're right. The $50 million isn't going to get us all the way there. It certainly will help. Raising fees helps. I think having more money available for facilities will help. And then I think outside the financial realm, I think there's a lot of work being done in the Park Service about the kinds of programs that we offer. I think there are certainly things we can do working with our concessionaires to look at different types of visitor services that could be offered that are the types of services that visitors are expecting in this day and age that will help us be ready for what we hope is a large influx of visitors and different visitors than we've had in the past.
The chair recognizes Mr. Palmer.
Mr. McCrae, in your testimony, you talked about that park visitation's been unchanged over 25 years despite a 30% increase in the population in the United States. And you raised some concerns that if you deducted the number of visitors to the World War II Memorial and the newer monuments, that really park visitation is down below 1987 numbers. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
The population of the country has grown significantly over time. The visitation to the parks have not grown over that same period. If you think of the parks as 400 units that host 300 million visitors a year, $3 billion budget, and there's not a chief marketing officer. The word marketing in the parks, frankly, until Director Jarvis came along, was willing to use it, in public, was a verboten word there. Promotion, of course, is in the act, so they recognize the need for promotion, but The parks have an amazing brand, and they have amazing assets, and they have a huge number of visitors that want to come but don't know much about it. So there's some great opportunities to join with the National Parks Promotion Council and the National Park Foundation and Brand USA to promote the parks. And frankly, the visitation within the parks hasn't reflected the change in our population either. So there's some work that needs to be done there. And the Park Service, I think, has recognized that, and the Centennial has given them some opportunity to focus on it and try to find a way forward there, and we really encourage that and support that as concessioners. Within our parks, of course, we go out and promote the parks where we provide services, but that still leaves 300 parks that don't have anybody promoting them. So huge opportunity there in our view.
Sounds like we need a major marketing plan. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Before I close the hearing, I want to give each of our panelists one last question and one last chance to close. And so I like to close hearings by asking any of the panelists to respond to a question you wish you would have been asked. So the chair will recognize each panelist for kind of a closing statement. Mr. Balan, you're recognized first.
Well, that's interesting. You know, it's hard to sit here in this limited amount of time and talk about all the things that we've experienced as concessioners. I want to reiterate the comments of my fellow panelists by saying that we work with an extraordinary group of people who are absolutely dedicated to the prospects of the National Park Service mission. They, as much as we have our hands tied. Listening to Ms. McDowell's comments about being able to change contracts, you know, to me, put in a more simple way, which is what I was confronted with, and it was never said to me, was that when you, after you get a contract, after you win the award, they really can't negotiate with you. And the reason for that is that the National Park Service is wary. I won't use the word afraid because I don't think you're afraid of anything. But they're wary of another bidder coming back and say, oh, well, if you'd let me do that, you know, I could have blah, blah, blah. And they're afraid of those lawsuits, and I understand that. But I think there has to be a modicum of common sense brought to the National Park Service in a business-like fashion that will allow it to be flexible over these contracts, because as I said, things change, big things change, and you have to be able to change direction as you need to. And again, you have partners working for you, with you, that are willing to toe the line and do the right thing. I mean, it's in all of our best interests to promote the parks, provide the very best service we can, because we are facing right now, as Congressman Palmer said, we are facing a crisis of attendance, and we have got to find a way to make the National Park Service relevant in this technological age, because they say that if a child does not go camping by the time he's 16, he will never go camping in his life. Now that's not the generation that I grew up with, and I grew up in the age of no television, and now every kid walks around with a television in his hand, and so we have to seek ways. I think to your point, I think the question is, what can we do together to make the National Park Service relevant for the next generation?
Well, thank you very much. You're absolutely right about contracting. When I was state treasurer, we would issue RFPs and award external managers for money. And then if there were substantial contract revisions, we would have disgruntled bidders after us. So you're absolutely right. It's difficult for government when you're dealing with big contracts like that. Thank you very much. Mr. Klene.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity once again. And thank you, Mr. Balan, for giving me time to think of a question I would have been asked. You know, I think there's many questions, and to Mr. Balan's point, you know, we haven't had the opportunity to speak at length about the many issues that I think we do need to address over time. But representing Grand Teton Lodge Company, a company that was started by John D. Rockefeller, Jr., you know, really just prior to the formation of the park itself, the same individual that donated the lands, I think about whether or not these wonderful assets that Madam Chair, you've enjoyed on many occasions, Jenny Lake Lodge, Jackson Lake Lodge, Coulter Bay Village, you know, whether that type of ingenuity and those types of visitor accommodations and fine dining and the wonderful trips that we provide to people on the Snake River and the wonderful cookout sites we have on Elk Island, were the rules the same in 1955 when these lodges were being built and put together and the visitor services determined? Unfortunately, I think in today's day and age, that would not have happened. And we'd be left with a park that didn't have these facilities that really enhance the visitor experience. To stay in a room at Jackson Lake Lodge that has a view of the Tetons is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. To float on the Snake River on one of our float trips is just an unbelievable way to see wildlife in its natural habitat. And I think, unfortunately, with the current process, that type of ingenuity and new services and new facilities really aren't feasible and possible today. Thank you once again.
Thank you, and I never tire of that visitor experience. I've been doing it since I was a little girl and hope to, God willing, be able to do it until I'm no longer around. Thank you, Mr. Klein. Mr. McCrae.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would say a simple way to think about it is if you put the folks that are responsible for preserving thousands and thousands of year-old trees and hundreds of year-old structures into the job of preserving the contracting system in the National Park Service, you probably won't get it modernized. Getting business folks in that have some of that background and training, which they have been doing, so there's some great movement in that area. You know, it's a big ship with a small rudder, and you have to turn that rudder sooner and faster. And I believe the Park Service recognizes many of these challenges. And frankly, if the shackles associated with either their culture or the laws, the things that are preventing them from moving forward, were taken off, I think the progress would be amazing. So great opportunities ahead, and I think the concessioners certainly want to be a part of that and are you know, looking every possibility to find ways to collaborate with the National Park Service to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCrae. And with all eyes on the Park Service for the next year as it celebrates its 100th, it really is an opportunity to address some of these issues while we're all acknowledging the great pride that we have in the National Park Service. Ms. McDowell, you are our final speaker today.
Great, thank you. I think just in general, the Park Service, of course, is interested in doing anything we can to do better at accomplishing our primary mission, which is meeting visitor needs and protecting resources. And to follow up on Mr. McCrae's point, I think there are a lot of things the Park Service can do and is doing to improve business acumen within the Park Service by bringing in new staff, by better training for the ones that exist, both to better manage parks and to be better partners with our private sector contractors. And I would also be remiss if I did not mention a question that I wish I'd been asked was what marketing campaigns is the Park Service running in order to prepare for its next century? And I forgot to mention our Find Your Park campaign that's been running with the National Park Foundation, which is a major marketing and outreach push to invite new members of the American public to come to parks. And I think we're hoping that that effort bears a lot of fruit. Thank you.
And I want to thank our panelists and guests for being here today and for sharing your experiences and ideas with us. I would also like to enter into the record statements from the following organizations: David Woodside, President of the Acadia Corporation, John King, Regional Vice President of Forever Resorts, Pamela Pitts, Secretary of the California Parks Company, Tim Rout, CEO of Dino Ventures, Forever Resorts, Gettysburg Tours, and TRF Concession Specialists of Florida, and John Gardner, Director of Budget and Appropriations at the National Park Conservation Association. Without objection, so ordered. Again, thank you, witnesses, for taking the time to appear before us today. This hearing was one of the more enjoyable and enlightening, and caused us to think about some opportunities legislatively and with regard to our stewardship of our great national park system. So thank you kindly. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.